Absolutely. Okay. All right. The efficacy of antimicrobial nanometals and their toxicity to humans. So, antimicrobial resistance is somewhat a threat, not to scare anyone. There's a lot of organisms here that have adaptive mechanisms that are creating difficulties for us to treat with normal antibiotics like prescription pills and things like that. Staph aureus, Enterococcus, E. coli, Pseudomonas, and then we have Candida, Aspergillus, so bacteria, fungi, and even parasites. In older articles from the CDC, like in the 80s and 60s, even showed Plasmodium species have adapted to certain anti-parasitic medications. The WHO, the World Health Organization, shows that there's 5 million associated deaths with antimicrobial resistance in 2019 study. About 1 million of those were directly caused by antimicrobial resistance. The other 4 million are like associated. About a $2 trillion loss in gross domestic product each year by 2030, and healthcare costs. And social determinants of health play a role here. Some people have infections and they're not able to get to healthcare in the right amount of time, and there's not enough education sometimes on this topic where people don't know about taking antibiotics properly, applying antifungal topical ointments properly. And sorry about the little picture, surgeries, C-sections, and chemotherapies. This is immunosuppressed patients is a concern here. Bacteria just love these environments where they can adapt easily because there's immune suppression. So natural genetic drift is one thing. It's just complete random chance that these organisms can create resistance, and then misdiagnoses, which MALDI-TOF and newer forms of identification can really help this to avoid these misdiagnoses. Over or underutilization of antibiotics. The under is like saying the antibiotics not being used in the proper way, or over like treating certain staph infections when the body can take care of them. So it's more of a focus on immunosuppression. And then climate change. Hatfield has talked about this in our classes before, with fungi being more adaptable to warmer environments. And so maybe they're going to start causing issues in warmer regions that as they start encroaching inwards in the lands, from Florida, and mosquitoes also with parasites like Plasmodium. People have started getting malaria in Florida, Texas, Louisiana. And instead of antibiotics, like the normal things, let's talk about nanometals. This is a different kind of research and a way that we can target these microbes. It's an interdisciplinary field that connects microbiology, pharmacy, agriculture even, and nanoengineering. There's many sources of extraction that we'll get into, and we have to look at the mechanism of action, how they work on these microbes, the variation among these nanometals, and the application, how it's actually going to work in the real world. This is just a small little picture of a very, very simplified version of their variation, but we'll get more into that. So the sources, it has to be cost effective. It has to address respective sensitivity of the target microbe, and it has to be non-invasive to the patient. One study synthesized copper oxide nanoparticles from Cissus quadrangularis. It's a grape family plant. Not a great family plant, but a grape plant. Another study, Rubia cordifolia, was able to extract from that plant silver nanometals. And the way they do this is they break it down, they boil it, and however it occurs in the chemistry manner in their field, they're able to get these silver nanometals. This is also a picture of how it kind of looks bloomed. It's just pretty. It's very natural kind of way to synthesize these. Another one, Coleus aromaticus, was able to synthesize titanium dioxide. And these plants are very interesting because they have a lot of antimicrobial and antioxidative, even anti-diabetic, anti-tumor properties. And there's plants, there's thousands and thousands of species that we can utilize from. There's that concern of over excavation of these things in nature, which that's another concern, but we'll also touch on that later. All right, and the great thing about these natural things is the biocompatibility and how it's biodegradable. They're just plants. And then there's also synthetic options, like a trisodium citrate assisted chemical approach to also create silver nanoparticles. So the mechanism of action, we're gonna use a specific example with silver nanoparticles and how they would act on fungi. So firstly, this is a non-specific reaction. Normal antibiotics usually bind to ligands or surfaces on the bacteria or fungi, and that's how they're able to get into the membrane. But silver nanoparticles use a polarity difference, where the electrostatic difference is able to kind of flow through their efflux systems, where in this picture right here, they just flow right through their protein surface membranes. And because that's this top one, and then it releases these silver nanoparticles into the organism. And then these fungal systems actually create their own nanoparticles already in nature. So by inducing our own, they kind of overregulate themselves, and we can kind of hijack that to take advantage of that. And then we can modulate all these different systems, like the efflux systems, and we can release potassium to lyse them, or we can decrease the activity of copper-dependent cytochrome C oxidase on the membrane, and we can modulate the transcriptome, epigenome, and metabolome, many different processes. So the variation. There's the pharmacodynamics, which is how we can target this specific microbe. There's the pharmacokinetics, which is how it's going to flow through the body, how it's going to metabolize, and how it's going to be flushed from the body. And the types of metals and other factors like size, surface area, and toxicity profiles that we'll touch on. So bactericidal is one way. Can we just kill it? Or do we want to slow it down to pair it with antibiotics? And the metallophores, this is a approach like a Trojan horse, where we can pair a nanometal with a ligand to sneak by the quorum sensing of the microbes so they don't detect these and they don't tell their friendly fungi or bacteria around them that, hey, we need to adapt. And then the specific sensitivities associated with these. For pharmacokinetics, we could look at things like pulmonary absorption if we're trying to target aspergillus in the lungs, or gastrointestinal absorption for C. diff or whatever types of enterocolitis there is, and then how it can leave the body. And this one study touches on a bunch of different nanometals, and it's very extensive with how many types of nanometals there are for use. So for these metallophores, they already use metallophores, as we know, to sequester iron, for example, or nutrients. So if we send in our own metallophore, it blends in with their own metallophores. It strengthens the polarity difference, and it counters this quorum sensing. And highly dosing these microbes with nanometals can accidentally induce antimicrobial resistance if the target is not destroyed. And this one research article explains that less is more. And what this is they dose less than the minimum inhibitory concentration. So we're not trying to kill it, but we can actually reduce virulence factors by not trying to kill it, but less is more essentially. And what are the applications? We can use bone implants. And what I mean by that is if we synthesize nanometals into a bone implant, it can be antimicrobial. So we don't have these graft versus host reactions, or it can reduce those situations of having biofilms formed within our own bodies. There are cytotoxicity concerns though, which is this biocompatibility aspect of it, which has been kind of adapted in one study where if we paired nanometals, specifically silver and copper, in a specific ratio, which 75% silver and 25% copper seems to reduce this toxicity issue. Another situation is a topical ointment, like ketoconazole, as we know, it's an antifungal. If we pair that with a nanoparticle, it actually can retain 60% better on the surface of the skin versus a 38.4% retention rate, which aids that situation of we don't have time to always just apply this topical ointment on us. We're going to work, we're going to class, and there's not always the time to keep applying this. So if there's a better retention rate, that's more time it can act upon the species like Canada. Even in agriculture, while avoiding these toxicity concerns, we can target foodborne pathogens, we can avoid phytopathogens from taking out crops, and then anti-biofilm surfaces in hospitals, homes, and shared spaces. And then also nanobioremediation, which is boosting bacteria and fungi for pollutant removal. So instead of trying to kill them and get rid of them, it would actually assist them because there are some fungi that actually remove oils from the ocean even. And here's an example of that just in that picture. I've already explained that pretty much. Even algae even, and then even allowing plants to be more resistant as well. So any inquiries?
You said high doses of the nanometals will actually cause antimicrobial resistance. Do you know why it does that?
Mm-hmm. It's more like a misuse of a high dose if it doesn't kill it successfully.
Okay, so it becomes resistant to the nanometals?
Yes, it's just like antibiotics. If we don't dose it correctly and kill it properly, it's going to just learn just like antibiotics. So this could cause a second wave of antimicrobial resistance again. So this could literally work against us if we don't know how to utilize it properly.
Is this kind of a scenario where everything old is new again?
Yes.
Because I feel like getting bad sunburns on the Buffalo River one time as a kid in Arkansas, I had to put Silvadene,
Mm-hmm.
the silver, yeah, and it had silver particle in it as a healing ointment.
Mm-hmm.
And also bandages come with silver in it.
Yeah.
It seems like it's been around.
There's really interesting articles, even from like the 1950s, that I did not include because of relevance, that and accuracy, just for updated research, that this is literally an old thing that's been revamped into a bunch of new research. And I found it really interesting to connect a lot of these things.
Did you find anything covering toxicity? Because I know with like old hip replacements, it had what, cobalt, and
Mhm.
it would slowly release into the body and cause toxicity. in
Yeah,
people.
that's
So with the implants, like I feel like that's not. It's like less regulated than if you're taping something or rubbing it on you. Like you'd have to go get, if you had a hip replacement that was covered in nanoparticles, you can't just really just go take that out.
Mhm. That's a great concern. I definitely am not for or against these nanometals. I'm absolutely agreeing with that there's so many concerns that it needs to be very in-depth research for it. I kind of just barely touched on it with the 75% to 25% ratio of silver to copper, that they've found ways to reduce the toxicity profiles. But in my paper, I touched a lot more on that. It was difficult to make it more concise, but that's absolutely a concern.
How new is the research for using nanometals for antimicrobial resistance?
Literally just 2024, 2023, like it's really revamped and almost like a new expansion pack for a game. It's it's just really interesting, like you said, how this can just come up out of nowhere again, because somebody gets the idea that, hey, maybe we should bring this back because the current threat needs to be combated.
You know the size range?
The size? Yeah, so that's one of the things I forgot to add in. It was the less is more concept. So in one of these researches, they found that actually smaller nanometals is more effective against these microbes. Just because if you think about that one picture with how it's going through the efflux systems, the smaller it is, the easier it is to be undetected and not countered.
How small is that?
Yeah, how small is smaller?
2 nanometers is like 2.3 nanometers was like a really good size that was able to bypass certain mechanisms. But one nanometer to 100 nanometers is the range of nanotechnology, I believe.
So that was the particle size from the plants that they were doing
Yes.
extractions?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that the natural nanoparticle synthesized are better tolerated than chemical man-made?
Yeah, that's a cool thing. I think there's that biocompatibility with just like the genetic aspect of like maybe we're closer related to plants than chemicals in a sense. So maybe there's less chances of there being toxicity. There's also that interesting aspect. It's like, is this a situation where this is going to be an amazing breakthrough and then we go and mess up other cultures because we're stealing their plants? And because there's places in Asia and East Asia and India where there's 7,000 species of plants that we could use, but they're like these untouched regions that we don't want to encroach upon necessarily. And I think that can cause a lot of damage to those areas.
Was there any findings that suggested that some species were intrinsically resistant to the use of nanometals?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. There's also research that I have this one researcher that they specifically compiled like an entire sensitivity panel of like 20 different bacteria specifically with silver nanometals. So it went from broad research to specific, like only working with one nanometal, targeting a bunch of different bacteria, and some were resistant for sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you.